All right. Stephen Howard, writer, entrepreneur, among other things. Thank you for being here. And how can writers be more productive?
Whoa, that's a fastball question, TR, right off the bat. There we go. Focus. And when I coach writers, that's the one thing I try and teach them is to block out time. And by focus, it's not just focusing on what they want to write about or think about, but it's also focus on eliminating distractions. I put my phone on airplane mode when I write, because I write in 2 to 3 hour bursts. And, I don't want to be interrupted. And when I make about every 45 minutes in that period, I'll go make some coffee. And if I look at my email or look at my text messages, I know from research that my brain will now be off on those messages. And now that I put it on airplane mode, when I come back, man, I'm segueing into the next paragraph or linking from one chapter to the other, and my brain is still focused on what I'm writing, subconsciously, if not consciously.
Nice. Where do you do most of your writing then?
I still write longhand most of the time, so I tend to write on the couch, sometimes on the balcony if it's a good day and if it's not too noisy outside. But most of the time, my actual write, or in hotel rooms. Over the past few years or most of my career, I've traveled quite a bit, and so hotel rooms have been a significant place of writing for me.
Most of the time when I go into a hotel room, the first thing I look for, of course, is bed bugs. So, I look under the sheets or whatever, look at the edges of the mattress. But then the other thing, like the real thing I do when I get there is I think about, could I live here? And that's how I know if it's a comfortable hotel. If you think I could live here, I'd have to sacrifice a lot, but if I could live in this room, I'd be all right.
Yep. Yeah, for me, one of the key things is lighting, because again, if I'm going to be writing, so many rooms, they don't have good lighting at bedside. I mean, maybe a small table lamp if you want to read something, but if you want to write, I mean, you need some good lighting and good ambience otherwise, at least in my case, I start to droop, and instead of writing, I fall asleep.
In the most recent trip we took to Peru, not that we've been to a lot of trips, it's just the most recent trip happened to be to Peru. We stayed at the hotel right across from the airport right when we got there. And man, I can't remember the names of the cities, but the hotel was okay. And the beds, we had they called them 2 double beds. I call them a Peruvian king bed because it was about the size of an American baby mattress. Okay. And similar to some Clint Eastwood movie, some Western, where he's sleeping in a bed and then he has a chair at the end of it and he has feet in it. I was like, I'm glad I saw that movie because I had to use that to sleep in that bed.
That's pretty creative.
Yeah, hotel rooms. Yeah, the movies give you some ideas every now and then.
Absolutely.
So you're writing at home or when you travel, and from what I've seen, you've traveled a lot and been to a lot of different places, and not just traveled, but lived in a lot of different places. How does that affect your creative well for writing?
Well, I think the travel, the experiences has opened up my mind to a couple of things. One is just observing people, observing nature, particularly though observing how people interact with one another. The second thing is because I've traveled so much, I've actually read authors in many other countries, obviously only in English, but if they're translated works. But it's very interesting to, I lived in Singapore, for instance, for 21 years and got exposed to several Indian authors, Indonesian authors, a couple of Malaysian authors. And so you start to see or read about their views of the world or their views on certain topics, their perspectives. And it made me reflect on really what is my perspective? What do, think about it rather than just always be in autopilot mode. So it's been very beneficial.
What type of writing do you do the most then?
Well, all my writing is nonfiction. My father, coincidentally, was a fiction writer and was a mystery writer and well-known mystery writer in the United States, one of the top mystery writers in the 70s and 80s and 90s. But my work is all nonfiction, but because my business career, my functional area of expertise was marketing. My first few books were on branding and marketing communications. Then I created a series of quote books, Asian quote books, Asian words of wisdom, Asian words of proverbs, things like that. And now the last few have been on leadership because, again, career-wise, I've spent the last 10 or 12 years focusing on mentoring and coaching leaders. And so those books are kind of in response to the questions I get asked by the leaders I mentor and coach.
What's one of your favorite proverb quotes then?
Favorite proverb, probably one that came from China, from the Chinese proverb, and it says that we teach what we need to learn. And that actually applied to me because I was doing some part-time teaching in Singapore, one of the what we would here in America call community college type situations. And they asked me to teach a program that I kind of knew a little bit about the subject, but I had to actually dive in and learn it in order to teach it. So it's a really great phrase. We teach what we need to learn.
I like that. Yeah, it is. You do learn the most when you're teaching something, if for no other reason than you don't want to look foolish for not knowing what you're supposed to be
Yeah,
teaching.
absolutely.
What was the topic you were learning?
It had to do with a communications program, marketing communications program, and it was about technical writing. And like I said, my background has been nonfiction writing. I mean, corporate writing. I did a lot of corporate speech writing, brochures, things like that before the internet came up, and then I was writing websites and things of that nature. So, but this had to do more with technical writing, kind of user manuals, what we today probably would call user experience type writing. But it wasn't an area that I would say I was an expert in until I had to dive into it.
What's your dad think about that type of writing versus mystery fiction?
He didn't think it was as creative as his writing, in honesty. And I one time actually drafted like 100 pages of a novel, a concept idea, and he tore it to shreds. And I was probably in my mid-20s when that happened, and it kind of disincentivized me to ever think about writing fiction in my life.
Oh, huh.
Yeah, Dad was old school,
That's
hard
tough.
rock type thing, and he grew up in lower middle class environment and U.S. Marine, and he had his he was a tough nut character, and he had his way of doing things, and he I guess he thought that was tough love, but he tore my idea to shreds.
That seems the Marine way. Definitely, when you talk to a Marine, it's different than a regular person.
Yeah,
At least that's my experience with it.
I think he considered him to be my drill sergeant for writing.
Well, if he were a Marine, he would be your drill instructor.
Oh, sorry, you're right, drill
But
instructor.
just in case somebody checks this.
Yeah.
So, did you serve in the military anywhere?
No, that's probably I got that wrong. No, I never did.
Oh,
I went right from university into a corporate career.
okay. Well then, with writing the technical manuals or the technical writing, we were trying to learn Spanish for this trip to South America, and we have that one of the language learning apps. We were at it for about 6 months, still doing it, but probably not as much as we were doing it before the trip. And I was like, man, I feel like I've learned a lot of words, but if I go to a Spanish speaking restaurant and try to order something conversational wise, I couldn't do it that well, but I could understand more than I usually could. So that was good. And then we got something I was putting together, and the the manual was in Spanish and I could read it. And I was like, oh, okay, something's happening. I'm still not conversational, I would say, in it. Like somebody could have a conversation with me in Spanish. I'd get maybe 10% of it 20 minutes after the conversation was done if I was thinking about it. But have you learned any other languages in your time abroad?
No, I didn't. I tried to learn Malay at one point, but travel got in the way. You know, I was actually taking classes 2 nights a week, but you know, I was traveling so much I couldn't keep that up. And I actually have a similar experience on the language app. I tried one of the language apps to learn some Spanish, and I'd almost say the exact same thing. I understand a lot more of it. I can speak words. I can put 2 or 3 words together that people might understand, particularly with hand gestures, but I wouldn't want to be in a conversation using Spanish. And so I think that might be one of the unfortunate aspects of those apps. The way they teach sentence structure, it's kind of sentence you would never learn or use. Like, which way did they train station? I mean, whoever takes a train these days. So
El train.
Yeah.
Most of the Spanish I learned was in the Marines when I was on the West Coast in 2003 with the West Coast Marines, which were basically all Spanish speakers. They were either born in America but just Spanish descent, or they were from Mexico working on their citizenship. And that Spanish was not the cordial Spanish, I don't think, because when I got back and I tried to talk to some people, it didn't go over well. But when I was talking to them, it worked out okay. It's strange how quick you forget things when you don't use them. But yes. I think if I got kidnapped in the jungle, I would not be talking my way out of it in Spanish right now. But I could order a Coke to go at a Mexican restaurant. I could do that.
There you go.
Well, then, when you write, do you set aside a time daily or regularly to do it? And I know you talked about doing it in 2-hour stints usually, but do you have a daily goal for writing, like either by words or by topic or by, I guess you have the time, but are you looking for a word count in there too?
No, I don't do the word count thing. I do the 2 to 3 hours, which is what I find works well for me. And then I will block my calendar in advance. So we're recording this on a Thursday, and coincidentally, tomorrow afternoon, I've got my calendar blocked from 1 to 4 o'clock because I don't have any client calls. It's we're getting into the spring break season, so I figured, okay, I've got 3 hours, I can do that. And actually, the same thing next Tuesday morning. I think it's 7:30 to 10:30 blocked off on my calendar because again, I don't have any coaching calls scheduled at that time. So that's what I do, and I try and 2 or 3 times a week I'll block that amount of time off. And then of course, there's always the weekends. It just depends on what we're doing as a family or entertainment wise or anything. So I usually can sit down and write 3 to 5 times a week. And that works out for me.
Has it always been like that? Or is that something you had to figure out over time to kind of dial in what worked for your schedule and worked for the part of your mind that does the writing?
Yeah, I think I had to find some discipline to reach that level, quite honestly. TR, I know when I lived in Asia and the first few books I was writing, it was a little easier because I would basically say, okay, I'm on a 6-day trip next week. I'll write 3 out of those 6 evenings. So that was easy. And then I'd come back and can write after work hours, that sort of thing. But now today it's because, I've been working at home since 1993. I've got pretty disciplined about being able to shut off distractions, tell the family, look, I'm going to be writing, or I plan, like I know when people are not going to be in the house, and okay, great. I've got 3 hours. I can focus on myself and do it that way.
When you're doing technical writing, I don't have much experience with that outside of report writing, but do you have somebody that you show that, like the however 3rd or 4th draft to, or maybe it's the first draft? I'm not sure how it works for you, but do you have a person you run it by just to make sure it's making sense, that it's tracking, or is it more of a assignment where you or is it more of an assignment?
No, that kind of writing, when I used to do it, would be I'd find somebody that would perhaps be a user. I mean, for instance, I remember writing a user manual for a bank software, and I had some friends in the financial services industry, so I'd be able to say, "Hey, can you just go through these pages and see am I leaving anything out? Does this make sense to you? What questions would you have at the end?" And then, of course, that kind of writing too. Once you get like second or third draft, and it's kind of at the approval stage, then you have some people user test it and actually sit there in front of a computer screen and actually do hit these keys and see if it's working the way it's supposed to be working.
For that type of writing, do you feel like you're clicking into some sort of creativity in your mind where you're like, I'm writing this manual about how to do this process, but I want to see if I can do it a more creative way or a different way or a more engaging way? Or are you looking at it from like an outline saying, here's what I'm trying to accomplish, this to this, and then that's just how you get there?
Yeah, it's almost the opposite of the creative TR. Is that my work in that area has been how do I don't want to use the word dumb it down, but how do I slim it down? How to and that's difficult sometimes because I want to put in too many sentences to explain something, and you have to realize all good writers always keep the reader in mind, whatever they're writing. And so at that point, I'm thinking about, okay, who's going to be reading this manual, or who's going to be following these instructions, or who's going to be needing this information? And when they're in that mode, they're in the mode where they just want the bare minimum. They want to know exactly what to do. They want to be able to quick reference to fix a problem, troubleshoot some idea, be able to find it real quickly. So make sure the index is as best as you can be, so somebody can look up a problem. So it's almost, I try and minimize the creativity. Whereas in my own writing, my books on leadership, for instance, one thing I find is that it's really important to include stories. People remember stories much more. You can write 12 pages about how to give feedback, what are the proper techniques of giving feedback to somebody. But if you illustrate it with a story, and I can say, well, here's a situation, so-and-so was giving feedback, and you show what they did following the procedures that you've just written about, it sticks with them a bit more. So you have to be more creative on that side of the equation.
How do you keep yourself motivated to show up and do the writing when you need to?
These days, I don't find it hard. But look, I may be a bit different from some of your guests or your audience. I mean, I have published 22 books under my own name. I also help people publish their books. I've got my own imprint. I help, I edit people's books. I help them with the outline structure. So, with that concept of I'm going to get this done, I self-motivate pretty easily. And interesting, I don't hit writer's block very often. I mean, they're like everybody, you'll hit occasionally that bump where it's like, I just can't concentrate. I can't focus on that. But that's really what it is. It's more about concentration and focus. It's not about not knowing what I want to write, partly because my process is, and the way I coach people on writing is, have a really solid outline. Get an outline. The outline won't be exactly the way the book finishes, but if you've got a good outline and some key points for everything you want to write about, just follow the outline and the writing will happen.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is you just don't feel like writing at the moment. It's not that you don't have any ideas. You just don't feel like writing. It worries me to think of having an editor that was a technical writer, because I feel like there's going to be a lot of slimming down on everything I do. Like everything I turn in, like here's a science fiction space opera. And then you're like, whoa. This is 1,000 pages. It could be 200.
Well, that's what a good editor will help you do. But the good editor will also understand that it has to be in your voice. And if this is what you want to say. Now, if I was your editor in that case, I might, be reading it and say, you might have 2 book ideas here. What, would you, I mean, it could be a part 1, part 2, or it could be, hey, you've got a really good book idea and there could be a sequel. So do you want to, again, knowing your audience? I mean, in honesty, in today's world, very few people would buy a 1,000-page book, much less read it. But that's what a good editor will do, is help you find your voice and not slim it down because the editor thinks it should be X number of pages.
Have you thought about writing a book about editing?
No, I haven't actually. I've
Something to consider, I think.
yeah.
I
Like I
haven't
said,
seen books written by an editor about editing with little stories about editing,
yeah,
like a kind of choose your own adventure where you could say, if you want the basic information, go here, page whatever. But if you want with a little flavor, go here. Let's
yeah.
talk about Thomas Wolfe's editor.
That's an
Things.
interesting idea. And,
I
I'll
think
give
you're
that some
just the
thought.
person
I'll
for it.
give you credit. I'll dedicate the book to you if I ever get around to doing it.
Oh, whoa. Well, you flatter me. You can dedicate the book to whoever you like, but I would read it. Let me know if you write it.
Okay.
The leadership topics. How did you get to the point where you're like, hey, I'm going to write a leadership book?
It came out of my coaching. I did a lot of workshop facilitation. I've actually trained about 12,000 leaders around the world in the last 25 plus years. And by leader, that's anybody who leads a person. I'm not talking about C-suite people. It could be a supervisor, a team leader, a manager, doesn't matter. So I was writing about topics that would interest the early stage leaders in their careers. And then during the pandemic, I got this idea from, how's leadership changing coming out of the pandemic? And that came from, again, my coaching, talking with people, what they were struggling with during the pandemic, leading people remotely. And then also talking to people who were saying, I'm going to leave this job as soon as I can because my leader is terrible. My boss is terrible. They're micromanaging me, and understanding what their frustrations were and seeing the impact of the Great Resignation. So the current book I have out is called Humany, which is a word I created, Humony, Humany leadership, but it's about being people-centric. It's about understanding that you're not leading assets, you're not leading resources, you're leading human beings. And taking that into consideration, you still have to get the results. There's no doubt about that. This is not soft stuff, but it's how do you get those results sustainably at the same time without burning out your staff, without causing huge employee attrition, which is very expensive for organization. So that was where that book came out of, was thinking about how leadership is changing post-pandemic.
Do you have any shortcuts, or maybe shortcuts the wrong word, like little things that you use when you're first looking at a person in leadership or somebody, if you're coaching somebody about it, that you can get a taste for what kind of leadership style they have? Like, is there you can look at, like, an example would be how a person schedules, where if you have a leader that says, I have a schedule I have to do, it's a 24-hour schedule, 3 shifts, and I have 30 people to do it, and I'm just plugging in numbers, versus a leader or a manager that would look at it and say, I have that same scenario, but I'm going to look at the individual and see what they would prefer, and as much as possible, take the time to try to plug them into a schedule that works for them as an individual, but also works with 29 other individuals.
And that is the mindset change of what I mean by being a people-centered leader. The old style. Look, I was the old style leader. I mean, I was manager in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And, that's what I would have done. And I'll be honest with you, and I think most people would say the same thing, is I would do it based on what's best for me. I'm the manager. I'm the boss. It's my way or the highway. Not anymore. And by not taking that into consideration of people, and understanding, what's important in their lives, what responsibilities do they have outside the workplace, and building that schedule. Again, you want to achieve the results, but you want to do it in such a way that it provides as much flexibility and meets the needs of as many people on your team as possible. Those are the ones, that type of leader is the one who's not going to have high employee attrition. That's the one who you're going to find doesn't have a lot of drama in the workplace. You're going to see them having more cooperation and collaboration. So it's a mindset change. I can sum it up for your audience in kind of a sentence for you here, is that the concept of managing people is a 1980s construct. Nobody wakes up in the morning and wants to be managed today, and certainly no one wants to be micromanaged by their boss. So the mindset changes is that leaders have to understand that you manage projects, policies, procedures, things, but you lead people. You don't manage people. And look, and I say that, and it's not 100% of the time. You have to have a manager hat on sometimes. There are times when you're a leader, you have to basically sit down and tell somebody, no, this is inappropriate behavior, or no, this is the way it has to be done. There's a process that has to be followed. You can't go off and do it your own way. So yeah, you're still going to be a manager at times. But if you're a manager 20% of the time and a people leader 80% of the time, you're going to get a lot better results than if you flip that around and be the old school leader who's a manager 80% of the time and a people leader only 20% of the time.
Yeah. There's a thing I thought about in policing, which was if you start out being an asshole, you got nowhere to go. But if you start out the nice guy, then you can always switch over to the mean guy if you need to, and then come back.
Yeah.
But yeah,
absolutely.
I find that with leadership, you have to, like the scheduling thing, for an example, is you do what you can when you can, but at a certain point, there's a mission you have to fulfill. So you have to, you don't want to be walked on as a leader. So you have to, like maybe that's where that 80-20 comes in.
It is. And, it's interesting that one of my clients that I was with over in California in December, he was telling me exactly that same thing. He was head of security for the organization. I think his staff was more like 12, wasn't 30, but he said he did the same thing in that he went to the entire staff and said, okay, look, we have Thanksgiving coming up. We have Christmas coming up. We have New Year's Eve, New Year's Day coming up. Everyone tell me which of those holidays you want to work and which one you don't want to work. And then I will do my very best to scale. Obviously, I mean, they needed 24-hour security on their premises. But they was able to, say, give me your preferences and I will do the very best I can. You can have one of those. I will guarantee you one of those 3 holidays off to spend time with your family. So tell me what your priority is. Tell me what your second priority is. If you want time off, or if you want to work, because you're going to get, holiday double pay. You tell me and I'll do the best I can. And he said it worked out. He couldn't satisfy all their needs of everybody, but he said he did a pretty good job.
What kind of differences do you see from like generational differences in leadership, like either from the leader and from the people being led from different generations?
The baby boomers don't know how to listen very well as a general stereotypical leader. I mean, there's always going to be exceptions, obviously, but the baby boomer leader is like myself, where we were trained, we were told, the most important part of communication is getting our message across. Whereas the younger generation, I mean, if you're going to deal with the younger generation, you really need to listen to them. I mean, to me, the 2 most important communication skills of a leader are asking good questions and listening. And one thing I would say is one of the problems we have with not just the workplace, but in government, even in nonprofits, in the educational industry, is that too many leaders are not good at listening. And they jump in and they want to get there. Everyone wants to move so fast today. They don't want to have a dialogue. And, dialogues is where innovation comes from. Dialogue is where creativity comes from. Dialogue is where ideas pop up. But too many people are just focused on, 20-minute meetings. Let's get this done. Come on, guys, don't talk about anything. Let's sit and just do. And they're not listening. It reminds me, remember the movie, The Hunt for Red October? And they were talking about how the Russians were trying to find the submarine and they were dropping all of their sonic
depth charges,
depth charges into the water, but they were flying so fast. Both the boats were going so fast and the planes were flying overhead so fast they weren't going to be able to hear anything anyway. That's what I think so much leadership is like today. It's like that little segment of the Hunt for Red October.
Yeah, that's a good example. So you're doing what the policy or the practice is, but you're not doing it into a way where it makes any sense.
Exactly.
Do you use stories like that in your leadership books to explain to leaders and people that are being led, why leaders are a certain way, why their style is a certain way?
Absolutely, absolutely. And and then I'll share with your audience a real fast story if you'd like. I was coaching a gentleman in Texas in the oil and gas industry, and tough old roughneck, in late 50s at that time. Started his career in the field. And he was the rough and tumble, typical stereotypical male chauvinist leader. And then he got promoted in the field, and then eventually into the office. And he would yell and scream and throw his coffee cup across the room at times. And I observed this one time, and I sat and talked to him and said, you're going to burn your people out. You're going to, look at the churn you've had in the last 12 months. That's one of the reasons they asked me to coach you. He said, well, they have to put up with it. That's the way I am. And I looked at him, and this is the story in the book. I looked at him. I said, when you go to your children's school, do you yell and scream at the teacher or the principal? Oh, of course not. I said, I know you're a church-going person. When you go to church and somebody upsets you, do you lose your temper and yell and scream in the parking lot of the church or in the chapel itself? Oh, of course not. So it's not who you are. It's only who you are at work. This is the persona that you want to present, and this persona is going to backfire on you. I give him credit. 6 months later, he had changed, not 100% or 180 degrees, but he had changed quite a bit. But he put in all the work. He took the message to heart and started controlling himself. We worked with him on some mindfulness techniques, some self-reflection techniques, some self-observation techniques, and he put in the effort, and he became a much different leader 6-7 months later down the road.
It is seeing leaders develop is interesting. And I've definitely learned just as much, if not more, from bad leaders than I have from good leaders, maybe more from bad leaders. And how did you come to all these realizations? Is it from research, or I know you said coaching before, but is it from reading things, talking to people, or being a leader and also being led in your life?
It's pretty much the latter. I mean, I've had good bosses and bad bosses. I mean, I've had bosses where I swear I would never do it like them, kind of like, we've all said about our fathers or mothers. I'll never say that. And then later on in life, you say something that, oh God, Dad said that, didn't he? But, and I had some really good bosses. It's been a lot of observation. It's been through the coaching and just reflecting on what people need, bouncing ideas off of people I respect and trust. So it's a combination of all of those has formed my philosophy of leadership and then allowed me to write about it, quite frankly.
How much do you find of leaders that are not great leaders had a hard time growing up? Like, do you think it's, if you had somebody with parents that were good versus parents that were less than ideal, do you find that it's the basis, like that beginning basis of what people have is a little skewed?
I honestly can't answer that because I don't delve into people's histories. I'm not a psychologist. But if I can just add one more point, though, to what I was just saying there, the other thing is I've learned a lot from my own failures, my own mistakes as well. So I think that's where it came from. But in terms of being brought up, no, I think what I find a lot of poor leaders are the ones who just focus on results, and don't take into consideration the impact on the health and well-being of their team. And also, for whatever reason, they want to hog the glory. They want to claim all the credit. They won't share credit with the team. So, one of the differences between a poor leader and a great leader, the great leader will always say it was a team effort. And the great leaders will always say, this is what I accomplished, and will take credit for it.
Yeah. I think the reflection is a big thing, to be able to see it in yourself as easily as you see it in others. And then the bad leaders, I think a lot of that is just fear, that they're afraid. And I mean, that could be to what you just said, the same.
Yeah, and it's part of our societal culture. It's certainly part of corporate cultures. I mean, leaders are afraid to make a mistake. Leaders are one of the things that again right now, particularly with the older generation leaders, is trying to teach them that it's okay to say, I don't know. No leader today can have all the answers. I mean, this world is changing so rapidly on us. I mean, whether it's the pandemic or AI or, anything else going on, no one can have all the answers. You have to be able to stay in front of your group and say, look, I don't know the answer. I may not even know the right course that we're going to take yet. I believe in us as a team. I believe that we work together. We can figure it out. And we may have to make some course corrections as we go down whatever route we take. And that takes a bit of humility, a bit of humbleness. But that's how you build trust with people. People, they won't trust a leader who's always saying, I've got the answer. I've got the answer. And sometimes those answers are wrong. That's how you're going to lose trust.
Do you think that writing about leadership has given you more insight than with the idea that writing helps you process your thoughts or helps you think?
Yes.
If you buy into that writing about leadership teaches you more about leadership, kind of that same thing of your proverb of you teach what you need to learn. When you're writing, you're really learning about the topic.
Absolutely. And, and even my leadership writing began writing curriculum, writing 2 or 3 day workshops, and then delivering those workshops and finding out the questions, finding out what did not resonate in the classroom, what was too cumbersome or what was too easy, and then modifying, iterating and, changing it. And then that led into, that was my original writing on leadership and leadership skills, and then segueing, taking that information and putting it into the book format. So definitely. And, the other thing I would also say, it goes partly to that proverb, but, my philosophy of life, and sometimes I'm asked, what's the one thing you want to leave with an audience? I always say, never stop learning, because life never stops teaching. And so I still today, look, like I said, I've trained, coached, and mentored over 12,000 people. I've been doing this for 25 years. I still every month read 30 to 40 articles on leadership. I still read 5 or 6 books on leadership. Sometimes it just reinforces things I knew, but maybe put in the back burner. And I try and write 1 or 2 books on leadership. So, but I'm constantly reading, talking, watching YouTube videos or TED Talks on leadership, but also reading books on it.
Do you have a idea that you formulated or that you've realized about how long a leadership book should be?
I think, and this probably applies to almost any nonfiction type book, somewhere in the 170 to 195 pages seems to be the sweet spot of what people are buying, what people are reading. One of my earlier books on leadership was aimed, as I said, at that younger generation. And the title was boring. The title was 8 Keys to Becoming a Great Leader. But the subtitle is Tips and Techniques from Gibbs, Yoda, and Captain Jack Sparrow. So I took Gibbs from the NCIS TV show. I took Yoda, of course, the philosopher leader from Star Wars, and Captain Jack Sparrow, the kind of situational type leader, and use scenes from their artistic endeavors and quotes from them and use that to illustrate the book. And that was only 140 pages. But again, that younger, that 25 to 30, 33-year-old audience, they eat it up. It's an inexpensive book. I think it's like $8 or $9 on Amazon or something. It sells very well. But that younger generation likes it because they like that short and sweetness rather than a 220, 250 page book.
Yeah, I do. I like that as well. I think that's one of those things where you can look at it and say, okay, I can get through this pretty quick, learn the things. And then if I need to, I can go back and read it again without thinking, oh, this is 800 pages. I'm not reading that again. Exactly. Where you're looking for just those important parts where you can have like a list of here's some leadership traits, here's some whatever. Here's some quotes. I
Mhm.
do like quotes, so I think you're on a good track with the quotes.
Well, I've got a book called Leadership Words of Wisdom. It has over 1,000 quotes on leadership from philosophers, entrepreneurs, business leaders, statesmen. So get your address later and I'll send it to you.
I can find it on Amazon. I don't mind
Yeah.
paying. The where do you think people get their foundation, or where have you found in your work that most people get their foundational understandings of leadership? When does that develop, and where do they get it from?
From their own leaders. And unfortunately, that becomes an issue because of the mistakes that the leaders make, for instance, in feedback. Now, most leaders are very poor at providing efficient feedback, and therefore it just cascades down and down and down until somebody gets into a training program or picks up a book and read it. But, it's similar to being a parent. I mean, where do we get our parenting skills? From our parents and our spouses' parents, typically, for better or worse, or, it depends on how close your family is and lives nearby. Sometimes your grandparents, but you can pick up a book and read about parenting, but it's a whole lot different than actually going through it. And the key word you mentioned earlier, I think is really critical, is reflection. I mean, if you're a parent, you hopefully are reflecting every now and then about what you're doing well and what you're doing wrong. Well, if you're a leader, I also would encourage you to be reflecting at least once a month. What's working, what's not working. Be honest with yourself. What mistakes you're making, and how can you minimize those mistakes in the future?
Yeah, for me, reflecting and empathy go like they're really close together. Like, especially in policing, I think one of the things that makes you better at policing is putting yourself in someone else's shoes, or trying to see it from their perspective. Maybe not putting their shoes on, because that would be weird, but seeing it from their perspective. And it worked for me. And I think there became a time where maybe I was too empathetic. So you have to, I mean, if you're so empathetic with everybody, you're never going to write a ticket. You're never going to arrest anybody, because you're going to make excuses for them. But you have to walk that line of, is this reasonable? Is it reasonable from their action, from their perspective? Is it reasonable from my perspective? And just having that thinking, that understanding that there's more people in the world than just yourself, and more circumstances than you probably understand.
And what
That's
you've just described is what I would call a mindset. And that's what my book's about. My keynote speeches are about leadership mindset. It's changing that mindset about what it means to be a leader today. And I'm not advocating that, you just become the happy, smiley, everybody. Let's just, every Friday, let's have dress down day. Let's have cupcakes every Thursday. No, we have to get some results. There's no doubt about it. So it's walking that fine line and I've seen leaders who are just the opposite, who go too far down that, and they're very friendly. Everybody loves working for them, but they don't produce the same results that other people in that same organization will produce. Same with, you can be the hard ass, you throw your coffee cup across the room, yell and scream leader, and look, you'll still get great results, but for a short time. And what you have to understand is the cost. It's not the costs of employment, but it's going to be the cost of replacing people and the health and well-being. I mean, do you really want to, have on your tombstone that you were the kind of leader who, 10 or 15% of the people who work for you ended up with the psychological disorders or mental unwellness disorders because of the way you led them? No, hopefully not.
That's a great stat. If you were a leader, to be able to go to an interview and say, I have 0.002% of my followers have developed psychological problems. I like that. That should be figured into a social credit score.
It should be. It should be. The same thing is, I mean, this is, I'll be a little soapboxy here, but organizations, they look at attrition, employee attrition across the board, maybe by geographic location, maybe by big divisions. But I've seen situations where I've had two leaders in the same functional area of an organization, both leading. One led 23 people and the other led 25. So really almost same size. One leader had a 25% employee turnover and the other had 8%. And like, it's the same company, same functional area of the company. It's obviously the leadership style. And people don't measure that, and they don't realize that, what is that person who's got 25% employee turnover annually? What's it costing the organization to recruit, to hire, to onboard, to replace people who've quit their jobs?
Yeah. I think, just as an aside, I think a social credit score, outside of how we just hold it in our own mind and gut feelings of how we think about people, there's some bull, a government installed social credit score. But as far as the ideas of empathy and in reflection, I think nice is good. Like having a nice person is good, but good is better. So you want a person that is good rather than a person that is nice. You can be nice, but sometimes you can't be nice. So
Yeah. And not saying you have to be the best friend with everybody, but you have to be friendly. And you have to be empathetic. The only way to be empathetic is to listen, to understand. So those are the skills that are going to make great leaders going forward, because they're the ones who will keep good staff. And they're the ones, I often ask people, project your company 5 years from now. What percent of your revenues are going to be from products or services that you don't currently offer? And in most cases, it's anywhere from 50% to 80%. Well, those products and services that are going to be created will only come from your people. They're not going to come from AI. They're only come from people who collaborate, who talk to one another, who exchange ideas, who build upon each other's ideas, who have a work atmosphere where it's okay to test and fail, but learn from those failures, that you won't be criticized for trying something. That's how you're going to innovate. That's how you can get creativity.
do you find that leadership styles are regional? Like if you're in a different country, do you feel like there's a predominant leadership style there versus somewhere else?
Oh, definitely. The country is the word I'm looking for. Country culture has a huge impact. I mean, and you have societies like Thailand, which are very collectivistic. They're very friendly. Talk. They don't always get the results that a Western country would get. You have hierarchical countries like India and Germany, very top down. One of the books I wrote about was about the Volkswagen scandal, and how that scandal has now cost Volkswagen something like $33 billion in the last 10 years. That scandal was simply because their environment, the engineers were afraid to tell their bosses that something wouldn't work. So they created a cheat device to cheat the EPA testing standards. That was a fear culture. But that was very Germanic, and that was one. It was Germanic culture, but also it was the Volkswagen corporate culture. So you've got the country culture and then the corporate culture, and that can change around the world very dramatically.
With your publishing, how did you get started into that?
I published my own books to begin with, and then had some people just reach out to me and say, "Hey, I've got an idea. Can you help me?" And and I would do it pro bono for a few years, and then realized the time commitment that would take to, first it was just more in helping people get their ideas on the paper, but then when it came to helping people structure their book, helping people to actually put it into the book formatting software that's required, I learned that skill. I went out and learned that. Understanding how to work with Amazon and their KDP, their Kindle Direct Publishing unit, and how that changes. So now I provide those services. I can help everyone from editing or content creation, editing, right through to getting the book published and putting it up on Amazon and giving them advice on how to market it. So
that's how that your publishing organization works, is through the KDP?
Yes. Yeah. It's for self-publishers. It's for, and one of the first questions I always ask somebody is, why do you want to write this book? and what do you want to get out of it? And if somebody says, well, I want to write I want a bestseller, I want to retire, I want to buy a house in Costa Rica. I said, well, unless your name's Stephen King or something equivalent to that, you have very ambitious goals. But for most of the people I work with, again, only with nonfiction authors, most of it, they want credibility. They want to be able to say they're an author. They want to build their speaking career or their workshop facilitation career by having a book about the topic they talk about. And that's my sweet spot. Those are the people that I work with. And it's really, I work with people who are writing either professional development or personal development type books. I mean, when I say nonfiction, I probably wouldn't be in a good person to help someone who wants to write a recipe book or cookbook, or somebody who wants to write historical fiction. The editing side, yeah, but not anything else. And I certainly can't help a fiction author because I know nothing about plotting and characterization and foreshadowing and all the things that go into making a great story and a great novel. So I focus only in that nonfiction, as I said, mostly professional development, personal development space.
You don't use foreshadowing and technical writing? That could be
interesting. Not too much. So, but the only foreshadowing was I'll maybe say something in there and say, the great leaders are great communicators, and we'll talk more about that in chapter 6.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
that's about the best exciting foreshadowing I can do.
I can't wait for chapter 6 now. What are the best ways you found to motivate other writers?
Keep going back to their purpose. Because that's motivation is intrinsic; it's within us, and to do a couple of things. Don't do anything that's going to demotivate you. Like I'll go back to one of your earlier questions. I had somebody who got very frustrated because they were trying to write 5 pages every time they sat down. I said, "What's so magic about 5 pages? Why don't you just sit down and get your thoughts on paper? Sometimes it'll be 3 pages, sometimes it'll be 7 or 8. But if you put yourself into that kind of stress, if you're not an experienced writer, you're either a first-time writer or don't only written a few things, you're just putting stress on yourself. These are artificial deadlines. So what goes back to why are you writing this book, and what do you want to get out of it, and focus on that. And then the little tips: find quiet space, put time aside. Don't one thing I think so many writers do is they'll write the first chapter and then they'll go back and start editing it. And I said, no, your job is to get words on paper. You're not the editor. You just get your thoughts on paper and just keep getting it on paper. And if I'm going to be your editor, when you've got like 40 or 50% of the book done, I'll start editing it for you. And then when you get the next 20 or 25% done, I'll edit that. So your job is to write. Don't do anything, and don't show it to anybody. Don't show it to mom. Don't show it to your spouse. Don't show it to your neighbor. Don't show it to your best buddy until somebody's had a chance to edit it. Because all you're going to get is feedback that's going to demotivate you.
Yeah, that part about write the first chapter and then go on to the next before you edit the first. That's a good one. It's easy to get caught up in that because you'll end up with a first chapter that's on its 10th draft and nothing else because you've just edited.
Absolutely correct. When I wrote my first book, I did exactly what I'm recommending here. I think I had probably about 75% of it written. I did send it to a friend of mine that I knew quite well, and he knew the topic quite well. And one of his best feedbacks was, hey, that story you told about Singapore Airlines, that's really good, but it's not good enough to be in there twice. Apparently, I'd written the story in the 3rd chapter, and I repeated the story in the 6th or 7th chapter. And I hadn't picked up on that. So, but that's fine. I was just getting words on paper.
Yeah, that's good to get somebody to look at that and pick that up. Yeah. The not going back and rewriting what you wrote before without moving forward is, I equate it to like you're walking on a trip somewhere and it's a long ways and you just keep rewalking the first mile because you're like, well, I finished that first mile, but I'm going to go back and I think I can do that better. I think I can put some steps in some better places and maybe have some different scenery. And then you have to go back and start again, and you start again. And if you're on a 100-mile journey, that's not going to help.
That's a good analogy. And I tell people, I said, look, you're going to have thoughts. Write the first couple chapters. You may think, oh, I need to add that. I came across this great quote. I need to put it in chapter 1. Have a notebook, write that down, put insert in chapter 1. Now keep writing. When it's time to edit, you're going to do the first edit anyway, typically. Now go back and insert that quote in whatever chapter it was.
Do you find when you're writing that you write linearly? There you go. Said it right. Mm-hmm. Or do you like have an outline for your topics and say, today I feel like talking or thinking about that, so I'm going to do that one. I'm going to do this one. I'm going to do that one.
I typically, based on the outline, will write sequentially chapters 1, 2, 3, 4. But there are times when, maybe I'm doing something and I look at it and go, you know what? I'm kind of stuck here. I'm going to jump over to chapter 5 and work on that a little bit because, and look, most, the writing I'm doing are topics I'm familiar with, things I know, and I've done my outline. I've probably done some research on some things for each of the topics, whether that's finding some quotes or an article that I want to reference, a TED Talk I want to reference. I little notes I put into a folder. Basically, I have a folder for every chapter, and I'm just filling that folder before I get into the writing process. So I can jump ahead if I need to, but typically, because of my structure of my outlines, the topic is, I want to present the topic in a sequential fashion. So I tend to write it in that sequential fashion. But I'll do the same thing I just said. I'll have a notebook, and if I'm writing chapter 3 about something, and I think, oh yeah, I should mention this in chapter 8. I just, in my notebook, just quickly write a couple sentences, lines, a reminder, reference note, whatever it is. So when I get to chapter 8, that's now in that folder for chapter 8.
Do you find that you have ideas that occur to you and you write them down in a notebook, and then you end up with a list of notes for different ideas, whether it's about the same subject or like a book you're working on or a book you're thinking about working on, and then you end up with all these phrases or ideas on these little topics, but you have a list of those?
Yes, yeah, I do very much so. And actually,
How do you
right
deal
now,
with that?
I'm working on 2 books, and I've been doing some research on them. And I literally, I'm actually using different pens. I have 2 notebooks. And so for the first one, when I come across, I just write page, paragraph 3, reference this. That's in a blue pen. And when in that same thing I'm researching, oh, this can go in the other book. I take the black pen into a different notebook and try and keep it separate by colors as well. So, yeah, just
nice.
the brain's
seeing a little creativity leaking out there with the different colored pens. That's nice.
Yeah. And then same thing. I'll edit and I only edit in red, and I only insert in green.
I like that. Do you get to the point ever with all that collection of notes that it gets overwhelming? And if so, how do you deal with it when it gets to that point?
Yes, and yes. And I'll binge on Netflix or something silly like that sometimes. There are times when I just know my brain is fried. And actually, sometimes interesting. I actually did this a few days ago. I like to go back and watch a series that I've already watched before, because now I don't have to pay so much attention to it. I can just kind of enjoy it. So I watched The Newsroom the other day with Jeff Daniels, and I watched the 4 or 5 episodes of the first season. And even though I knew what the plot was, it was just, I can just vegetate, let my brain, because the brain I know is still going to be working back there somewhere, but I don't want to focus on those because I end up with huge headaches, quite frankly.
Do you have other things you do to kind of tap into that state of mind of writing, or the state of mind of receiving ideas or cogitation, where like those little ideas come to you more in those, like if you're going for a walk or running or swimming or working out?
Walks typically, and or even grocery shopping, and I'll put this little notebook goes in my back pocket whenever I'm, I'll go 5 or 6 weeks where I'm not working on any project from a writing standpoint necessarily, but during the times I'm writing, this little notebook and my little blue pen are in the back pocket everywhere I go. And, my wife knows that when she sees that, she goes, "Okay, you're writing again, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." We'll be somewhere. We'll be walking up a movie. I'll stop. I got to write a note down. We'll be, shopping in Walmart or someplace. And I just stop and I get out of people's way, but I stop in the middle of some aisle and I'll just be writing down a page or two of notes as something's come to my mind.
I developed a word for that called "adamighty," which means it's just smashing together the phrase, "I have a mighty good idea that I don't want to forget." So if I'm doing something and I like that you've embraced the notepad because that's your generation, that I have I'll do it in the iPhone is usually where I take most of my notes, but I still have notepads. And if I get a good idea that I don't want to forget, I'll start writing it down, or like a quote for a character to say something that I've just been thinking on, that the brain is working on it while you're doing other things. And my wife will say, like, she'll ask a question, or she's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I'll say "adamighty," which I've defined to her a few times of, I'm just trying to get this down because I don't want to forget it. So try not to talk to me right now. It's a nice way to say that.
Yeah.
Usually every time I say it, I have to explain what that word means. So it's not successful yet, but perhaps someone else will have more success with a word like that, or that word itself. But that's good. Yeah. That's good.
I've known people who, they say they get up in the middle of the night and they always have pen and paper by their bedside. For some reason, I'm not that person. For some reason, I rarely dream about what I'm writing, I guess, or rarely. So sometimes I'll take the notepad to bed because I know I've got thoughts in my head. I know I'm going to have trouble getting to sleep, and I'll have the table light on a little bit, and I can write some notes to just kind of do a brain dump. But I don't get up in the middle of the night with, I got this idea. Other people say they do, which is more power to them.
Yeah, I get that. And then I use the iPhone for that, which is great because it has its own light. You can just get the screen on and type in your note and then try to go back to sleep. Before the iPhone, when I had the notepads by the bed and I had the pen, and you have a little flashlight or a book light or some sort of pen light where you're like, I'm trying to just write this without waking up too much, or disturbing anybody. And then I came across a pen that looked like a regular pen, but in the hand, like the part where you hold on to, when you turn it on, it would glow. And it's not super bright, but it was bright enough to where you could see the end of the pen. Nice. So you could take your note like that. And that worked great at work for when you're writing a summons at night, or you're writing something and you still want to look around. You don't want a light on inside your car and you're writing the ticket up. But I also used it for beside the bed and writing in those times. But
nice.
Interesting that you don't have that. I get that so often. It gets aggravating, but I've been more aggravated by not receiving those thoughts from wherever they came from in that moment, and then regretting later not knowing it or not remembering it, or not writing it down clearly enough to be able to remember it. I mean, I'm sure sometimes those sleepy ideas are just bad ideas that you're not communicating well, that sleep part of the mind. But I've developed enough discipline to when it occurs, I try to write it down, and I often date them and write the time that it occurred. So if I need to piece it together somehow with something else, that's good, or just tracking over the years, different things you've been thinking about. So if I write a poetry book, and almost all my poetry books are done in order that I wrote them. Like, I think there's one or two that have a poem that I was like, well, this matches this one better, so I'm going to put it over here. But usually it's in the timeline of it. And there might be a gap of 7 years between two poems, but this one came before that one. You can go back and read those and you go, oh, I remember all of those points of life that I was thinking about when I wrote that. And it's a pretty interesting way to remember things, or to spark that memory or jog the memory.
Yeah. That's interesting. No, I think it's really important for all budding writers is capture your thoughts. And, you know, as you say, sometimes they could be crazy thoughts, you know, crap thoughts that like, why did I think that? But it doesn't matter. Get it down, capture it, and then reflect on it later and see if you can use it somewhere.
The more poetic side of me thinks, even if it doesn't make sense to you in the moment, write it down, because you might understand it later, or you might understand it much later. Like you can add something to it later, you can take something away from it, but write it down even if it doesn't make sense. And kind of the more strange thoughts are tunes. Like you get a harmony, or you hear a sound, and then you wake up and you try to capture that. And when you write that down, it's not the same thing. If I knew how to write music, maybe that would be better. I could, you know, have the bass clef, treble clef, and write it out. But I think it's worth capturing, and you're connecting with something, whether it's inside of yourself or somewhere else. What do you think that connection is when you have those ideas? Like, where do those ideas come from?
The brain is an interesting organ. Sometimes you may not consciously be aware of it. It could be something you overheard a conversation. It could be you watched a TV show or something, and it resonated somewhere in the back, or, you know, interesting. The things you don't always pay attention to, the brain is picking up somehow, and you never know. As you were talking there, I was thinking, you know, I remember one time I was actually in a Walmart, and I witnessed a supervisor interaction with a floor person, you know, somebody stocking the shelves. And I made note of it at the time. I don't know why. And then I referenced it at a later point. And I thought while you were talking, you know, if I hadn't written it down at that point, why would I ever remember an interaction between a Walmart supervisor stroke manager and a young person stocking shelves? But you know, it wouldn't have probably cropped up when I needed it, but by writing it down somewhere, it was someplace I could find and pick up and use it.
Yeah, writers write, so you got to write that stuff down.
Yeah, writers write. That's, you know, write. That's our jobs.
Well, it does feel like before you may have sold a little of the nonfiction writing as not being so creative, but I think the creativity is there. That that spark of something is still working around in the editor of technical paperworks. So I'm happy about that.
Good.
What is the best way for people to follow your work or to get your books?
Well, everything's on Amazon, both in paperback and Kindle. And now the two of the most recent books have actually been on audiobook. I've actually hired somebody to read it and produce it. And so the Human Leadership book and the previous book, which is called Better Decisions, Better Thinking, Better Outcomes, which is about going from mindful, as 2 words, to mindful in your leadership and decision-making processes, are both now in audiobooks. So everything's through Amazon. Really, that's the only place. I only sell through Amazon. It's the big behemoth. Or when I'm giving keynote talks, obviously have back to the room sales and copies of the books available. But that's the easiest place to find the books. If you want to reach out to me, if you want to talk about writing or creativity, send me an email, Stephen. It's with a V and an N. So Stephen, as you see on the screen there, at calientepress.com. And caliente is the Spanish word for hot, but the definition of caliente is passionate. And I'm passionate about my writing. I'm passionate about helping other writers, passionate about leaderships. And where I live in Southern California, the land is owned by the Agua Caliente Band of Indians. So we actually pay a lease to our Native American landlords. And so it's kind of my tribute to our Native American landowners and where I live. But also, like I said, it's a nice word that means passionate that most people don't know about. So it's calientepress.com.
That's nice. Nice. We were recently in Aguas Calientes in Peru. So
Oh, okay. I
I
didn't
didn't
know that
realize it was
there's
so
a
passionate.
Aguas Calientes in Mexico also.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of hot springs in the
Yeah.
US too, probably. How did you determine your format for your audiobooks? Like, do you have one person that's reading all the parts, and do they change their voice when they're when they're reading maybe a different character, or do you have different people reading different parts?
No, it's a solo reader, but what I worked with him on is changing his pace and emphasizing certain points. So I went through with them and say, look, these are the key points in these chapters that I want you to really slow down and emphasize, maybe even repeat it if necessary. And changes. He was a bit staccato, I think is the right word. He was a bit just flat when I first talked with him. When he did the demo tape for me, and I said, okay, I know this is a demo tape, but I really want you to be able to bring it up and bring it down, slow it down, speed it up. And so he's done a really good job. And I'm very, very pleased with this work.
Nice. Is that something you plan on revisiting with your other books that you have out that might not have an audio format, or going forward?
Probably, and maybe even more so with I'm right now working on a series of books that when they come out in the next 60 days or so, they'll come out. There'll be 3 of them immediately. These are going to be short books. These are going to be 80, 85 pages, very tactical books on various leadership skills. And I might have him do that. And, you know, as I was thinking about it, I might even have one tape be like 3 books at a time. Yeah, I've got a vision of maybe doing 15 to 18 of these books over time. So we could do individual on each one of them. They'd be very short, you know, what 85 page book is probably, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes max audiobook tape. But if we did, you know, 2 or 3 of them in one tape, you know, it could be a 2-hour audiobook with all 3 books in there. So we'll see. I don't know. I haven't gotten to that point yet. Still trying to finish the 3rd book.
Do you put those together with the ebook format in mind, where you're like, I'm doing these smaller chapters where people can do in a sitting pretty easily, a couple pages, and then they feel like they're progressing through better, so more likely to finish it?
Yeah, very much so. And even the paperback version, I'm keeping it to each chapter is going to be 6 to 9 pages probably. So even if you're reading it in a paperback format, you can read a chapter easily in a single setting.
That's one of when you write a book, that's those things that maybe you didn't think about before, but then after you finished it, you're like, or while you're writing it, you're like, wow, how do I do these page breaks? How do I do this if I'm going to a different scene or a different topic in a chapter? Should I do a double space here just to set it apart a little? And then when you get into the formats, and I like KDP, when you get into the format of paperback, hardcover, and Kindle, they have those programs for it. But it's one of those hidden things of publication that you don't I didn't expect to take up so much time, where you're just like, okay, I finally finished, and now it's going to be published. And I think a lot of people end up rushing that part of it, that self-publishing part too, because they just want to get the book out. So they don't bother getting the sample sent to them so they can see how it looks, or look at the sample of the ebook just to make sure everything is just right. Because there is a point where you get to it where you're like, I'm just sick of looking at this. I want it to be done. Yeah. But instead of publishing it, I think you step back, take a break, and then go back to it again.
You have to. And again, I would also add to that, know your audience. I was working with a married couple in Texas, and they wrote everything, and they were thinking about it like in 10.5, 11 point type. And I said, your audience is going to be, 45, 50 plus. That's really who you're talking to. Here, I'm going to recommend we do a minimum 12-point type on it, and do a little bit more white space, a little bit more spacing, give a bit more margin on the side. But again, understanding that, those of us who need glasses to read will appreciate a larger point size, particularly in the Kindle version, because Kindle's not a page count. I mean, you might change a book from 150 pages to 170 pages by playing around with the type size, but that's still not the end of the world. But on Kindle, who cares? Make it easier for the people to read what you want to write.
I've often thought on Kindle, I would like a way to scroll it, whether you're scrolling it like, the Star Wars credits, the story or whatever, or if you're scrolling it just in a single line across, because there are times reading on the Kindle where I get tired of having to push it to go to the next page, to go to the next page, to go to the next page. And it would be nice to just set it up, whether you used eye tracking or anything that fancy, or maybe just a little slider on the bottom to do the speed that it scrolls to where you could just read. And I bet over time you would find that you got to be a better reader, or at least a quicker reader, that
it's a nice idea. We should call that teleprompter mode. Call it teleprompter mode. So
nice. I like
the
it.
way people read their speeches on a teleprompter. And, that's very good. And then let people have controls. I mean, you could set it to scroll at certain speeds.
Yeah.
And then they can customize it for the speed that's best for them at the time that they're reading.
Yeah, got to go with a slider to do the speed, so you can dial it back and forth.
Yeah. Nice.
Good ideas. Lots of good ideas here. Lots of good ideas.
Bezos. Let's give him a call.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he listens to this, so he'll pick it up.
Okay.
Have you thought about, a 90-page book, that seems reasonable to me as an adult, but I also like the idea of even shorter, and I know I could just read shorter pieces of it, but what do you think about leadership books that are like the classic golden books from growing up, where you have the children's stories, that you have leadership stories, and maybe it's designed for kids, or just you could also do for adults? I'm not saying, make it adult, but make it for adults.
I like the idea, particularly for kids. And I'll tell you one reason why. And if I was to write that series, one of the things I would focus on is to correct a societal issue that we have where children, 8, 9, 10 years old, when the girl in school or some on the playground starts to take leadership and organize things, and people call her bossy. Whereas when a boy does it, he's showing leadership skills. And I think we need to get away from that concept that little girls who are showing leadership skills are bossy. So that's one of the probably themes that I would base this around. I like the idea of leadership stories being done in that fashion. Just individual stories, particularly if you had maybe just 3, 4 stories that all had to do with the same topic. Very similar. So like these books I'm writing, like I said, are going to be more tip books. One's going to be on feedback. One's going to be on delegation skills, and they're very practical. These are the 6 steps to effective delegation. This is how you hold a delegation conversation. This is how you follow up once you've delegated to somebody. Here's some best practices about delegation. So, and every book's going to be like that. Here's some tips about feedback. Here's how to make feedback efficient. Here's how to have a feedback conversation. Here's some best tips, blah, blah, blah. So they're all going to be in that very similar format. I'm not sure I can get it below 80 pages. I'll try, but that's kind of where I'm at with that. But
the editor.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll find, maybe I need to find somebody else to edit my stuff. But I think on the stories are tales of leadership or something like that. And you had 3 or 4 stories about decision-making, or 3 or 4 stories about resilience or pivoting or strategic thinking or something like that. That could be a nice little series, without a doubt.
Growing up, we had I don't think it was a golden book, but it was a book about the Mona Lisa, and it had a Mickey Mouse theme. And in the middle of the book, there was a hole that went through all the pages, and there's a Mickey puppet. So
Ah,
you could operate the puppet while you're, reading. And it was a kid's book,
mhm,
but that would be an interesting model for kids books about leadership where they're involved in it a little. I'm thinking one of those things where once you got that kid's 20 or 30 years old, they remember the puppet
mhm.
book. It was a puppet of a squirrel or whatever. It may be a different animal for whatever different type of leadership thing you're going. You got to be alliterative, I think. So, you know, the servant leadership squirrel, that's going to need some editing. You're gonna have to figure that out a little better. But
Good ideas coming out.
yeah, these are good ideas. These are that you're going to need to execute because I got other things going on. But but when you put those out, I'll read them
Okay.
just because that'll be fun. But all right, so we got your social media stuff. You have a couple other things too, like you have an Instagram, a Twitter or X, and then a LinkedIn and some other things. And I have the Caliente Press on here as well. So
Okay.
those links will be in the show notes. So if anybody wants to scroll
Yeah,
through
that's
and check
great.
them
If
out.
somebody wants to talk about leadership, just reach out to me to LinkedIn. Actually I'm not very active anymore on Twitter or X, and Instagram, not as much. Of course, right now I'm in my writing mode. Like I said, I've got these 3 books I'm finishing off, and I've got these other 2 books that I'm in the early stages of researching. So I'm not overly active, but you can reach me through LinkedIn if you want to talk about leadership, Caliente Press if you want to talk about writing. Be happy to spend some time with you.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time. Great conversation. I was worried at the beginning that you were kind of downplaying the creativity of nonfiction writing, but I think it's there. I think it's there.
It's there, and I think also I might have missing when you talk about technical writing. I have in my mind technical writing is different than nonfiction writing. So when I've thought about technical
Oh,
writing,
okay.
that's more like user manuals and that sort of stuff. And so I was thinking about the creativity in those. So different use of the same phrase, I guess.
Yeah. I was putting you in a instruction manual box. Sorry.
Yeah, that's well. No, I put myself there interpreting what you're talking about in technical writing. But yeah, I totally agree. In nonfiction writing, particularly, well, across nonfiction, whether it's poetry, whether it's historical fiction, whether it's personal development, professional development. I mean, even cookbooks. Quite frankly, you'll find a lot of creativity in cookbooks, not only in the recipe themselves, but in the tips that they provide. So no, if I misinterpreted, I apologize to your audience, but no, there's no doubt that creativity is an important factor across the nonfiction spectrum.
I agree. Life is a spectrum. All right. Thank you very much for your time. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.
All right. Thank you very much. Nice conversation.
Thank you.